region, including in Africa, where the lives of millions of people depend on the shared rivers. And with the Blue Line, we recognize and support the effort of the party directly concerned to promote a sustainable and equitable utilization of water resources, including through cooperation, consultation, and negotiation with regard to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project. We call on all parties concerned to continue building upon achieved results and fully implement the 2015 agreement on the declaration of principle on the project. Outstanding issues need to be resolved peacefully, in friendly spirit and in good faith, in accordance with the international law and the 2015 agreement. Toward that end, we welcome the important role of the African Union in promoting negotiation and mediating among the three parties, and most recently at the meeting of the EU Extraordinary Bureau of the Assembly of the Head of State and Government on June 26, as well as the result deriving from the meeting. We look forward to continuous earnest efforts by parties concerned to, as soon as possible, resolve the remaining issues, including legal and technical questions. It is important that the view of all parties concerned should be taken into account, and all parties must refrain from any unilateral measures that might escalate the tension, undermining the opportunity to achieve a negotiated solution to the issue. Such efforts will not only help bring about a comprehensive solution that address the legitimate interests of all party concerns, but also have advanced confidence, deepen friendly relations among the country, and promote peace, security, and development in the region. In this regard, we would also like to emphasize the need to promote the best practices on trans-boundary water resources, including, among others, exchange of the data, information, notification, consultation, negotiation to address any concerns, and fully implementation of the legal framework among concerned parties. We are of the view that utilization of international water resources must be in line with international law and commitment of concerned party on the basis of harmonizing the interests of preparing concerned parties, especially downstream one, to ensure sustainable use and equitable share of water resources. It is also important to foster further codification and development of international law regarding the use of transboundary water resources, including those implementing the United Nations Convention on the Law of Non-Navigational Uses of International Water Resources. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Vietnam de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la République dominicaine.
Merci, le président.
የራሻውማ የሚገርም ነው። የራሻ የሚገርም ነው። ለማንኛውም ደስ ማ ኦኬ
We welcome His Excellency of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, also the Ambassador of Ethiopia and Sudan.
ላይ በቀጥታ ነው እየተላለፈ ያለው። ላይ በቀጥታ እየተላለፈ ያለ ነው። ከጎግል ላይ አውጥተን ያወጣ ነው። የተቀዳ አይደለም የምትሰሙት። ላይ በቀጥታ ነው። እዚህ ቀጥታ ላይ በቀጥታ ነው።
In this regard, we welcome the announcement by the chairperson of the African Union that more than 90% of the technical committee to discuss outstanding issues. The decision undertaken by the three parties to refrain from making statements or taking any action that may threaten or complicate further the AU-led process shows their level of compromise and good faith towards an amicable agreement. It is encouraging that the parties involved are displaying a constructive and positive approach in the negotiations, which may lead them to reach a mutually acceptable solution on the outstanding technical and legal issues. All three parties will need to make compromises in good faith in order to reach a deal in the incoming weeks. we highly encourage them to keep building trust as we stand ready to collaborate and closely follow the developments of the AU-led negotiation process. Revolving outstanding key issues like water sharing, drought resolution mechanism definitely set an excellent regional and international precedent for future disputes on these issues. It is important to avoid any potentially negative effect on households, incomes, and ways of living for the population. We humbly recommend the parties to take into account each other's legitimate concerns and interests, to avoid mutual mistrust in order to produce the necessary compromises and reach timely agreement. Let's keep this renewed spirit of conciliation and take advantage of this window of opportunities to veer away from potential confrontations and create a joint instrument through which the three countries would be able to build a trust and formalize cooperation. Finally, we would like to reiterate the need to continue the discussion based on common understanding, mutual benefit, good faith, and mutual trust until an agreement is reached. The diplomatic path should always prevail. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la République dominicaine pour son intervention et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Royaume-Uni.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And let me begin by thanking USG DiCarlo for her briefing and also all three parties, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, for joining the meeting today. The United Kingdom is a friend of all three nations with partnerships that support each to prosper. We recognise the rights of all three countries to utilise Nile waters and believe that, done right, the Grand Ethiopian Resistance Dam has, as Mr. Carlo set out, real potential to be a positive development for the region. Mr. President, the United Kingdom places strong emphasis on consensus between parties on developments that impact a shared natural resource. We are pleased many of the key elements needed to reach that consensus are captured in the Declaration of Principles, an agreement reached by the parties on the 23rd of March 2015. In particular, the principles not to cause significant harm and of equitable and reasonable utilisation. Since the DOP, the three parties have continued talks, including with the support of mediation by the United States, to reach a more detailed trilateral agreement on filling and operation of the dam. The progress and commitment has shown the spirit of cooperation across the Nile. We would like to take this opportunity to thank Sudan, though whilst a party to the discussions, for Prime Minister Hamdok's current role in brokering talks. We also thank the African Union Chairperson, President Ramaphosa, and the AU Commission Chairperson for their actions last Friday and over the weekend to support that effort, with a further round of talks to resolve those issues that remain outstanding. And I'm particularly grateful to Ambassador Machida for South Africa's update on those talks and our next steps to the Council just now. We are encouraged by the engagement and the commitment shown. Mr. President, we recognise, however, that reaching agreement requires compromise by all parties. It's important all parties keep sight of those principles agreed as part of the DOP. It is in that spirit that talks should continue and conclude. The United Kingdom is confident that working together, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan have the strength and resolve to reach an accord to the benefit of all. Mr. President, in concluding, let me once again reaffirm that the United Kingdom supports the governments and people of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan in their endeavours to reach a mutually fair and equitable agreement. I hope that they have all heard the message of Council members today that all three sides refrain from action that would undermine negotiations and engage constructively and urgently in a spirit of compromise to conclude negotiations and reach an agreement. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Royaume-Uni pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante de Saint-Vincent et les Grenadines.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also thank USG DeCarlo for her briefing. Let me begin by saying that St. Vincent and the Grenadines expresses its solidarity with our Egyptian, Ethiopian, and Sudanese brothers and sisters. In the spirit of camaraderie, we extend our sincerest support to your collective struggle for an equitable, reasonable, and lasting agreement on the allocation of water resources from the River Nile. As a small island whose identity is inextricably linked to a body of water, St. Vincent and the Grenadines recognizes and fully appreciates the intrinsic value of the Nile to each of the parties, not only as a symbol deeply enmeshed within their national identities, but as a critical resource upon which their dreams of development and prosperity depend. To this end, we respect each country's national interests, and we wholeheartedly accept their very credible concerns. At the same time, their collective identity, crafted through the existential links of the Nile, gives us confidence that they are more inclined to work together than pull further apart. In this regard, Mr. President, we are encouraged by the parties' determination as demonstrated at the June 26th meeting of the African Union Extraordinary Bureau of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government to continue their trilateral negotiations in good faith and in the spirit of solidarity towards an agreement that is reasonable, equitable, and amicable. We urge them to take the requisite bold political steps to conclude these negotiations. Given the intensified droughts and resource shortages precipitated by climate change, we acknowledge the need for a comprehensive and suitable agreement that thoroughly addresses each party's concerns, so that current and future generations of Egyptians, Ethiopians, and Sudanese can live, work, and play together as they peacefully coexist with their neighbors along the Nile. On issues as complex and as consequential as this, final settlements can only be achieved through a shared journey in which each party builds a reciprocal and recognizable sense of understanding. Mr. President, it is important to note that the concerned parties are almost at the end of this painstaking journey, as more than 90% of the issues have already been resolved. We are therefore confident that our Egyptian, Ethiopian, and Sudanese brothers and sisters will settle their outstanding disagreements, as all families do, with discretion and harmony. It is the collective wisdom of Africa that will facilitate a lasting solution to this situation. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de Saint-Vincent et les Grenadines pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Indonésie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. First of all, I would like to thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. I would also like to welcome the Honorable Minister Sameh Sukri, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Egypt, and of course, our dear colleagues, the permanent representative of Ethiopia and Sudan. Like others, we have been following this issue closely, both as a member of the Security Council and as a country which has long-standing relationship with the three brotherly countries. We have stated our position on this issue on various occasions to all the parties concerned, as well as in other instances. We have hoped that this issue could have been settled between neighborly and fraternal countries. I would like to note that the fact today we meet at the Security Council to discuss this issue should not create precedent, but should be seen as part of our collective efforts to help all parties to resume negotiation and to come up with amicable, acceptable, and implementable solution. I should like to add the following points. First, all parties must continue negotiation with the intention to find a win-win solution. From what we understand, most technical issues have been resolved. There are, however, some issues outstanding. I believe, like all marathon, the most important one is the last yard and, of course, for all runners to reach the end line. Therefore, I would like to emphasize that all parties should spare no efforts in effectively resolving these issues. Sometimes, when issues are outstanding, it is not due to lack of solution, but oftentimes it is also because of lack of political will. We implore all parties at the highest level to come together in the spirit of cooperation and solidarity, the spirit that we strongly adhere in ASEAN, called good neighborliness, the spirit of Ubuntu, of which African is famous for in resolving every issue. The second point is that all negotiating avenues should be explored and utilized by all parties. All the relevant parties should pursue facilitating or mediating roles as necessary. With the concurrence of all parties, any personnel or institutions that would assist in finding peace should be explored, including the United Nations and its Secretary General. In line with our long-standing position on advancing the role of regional organization, we believe that settling this issue in the regional context is always one of the best options. We commend the initiative of the President of South Africa, His Excellency Ramaphosa, in his capacity as Chair of the African Union to facilitate discussion among parties under the auspices of the Bureau of the AU Assembly. We welcome the fact that in the extraordinary meeting, all parties have renewed their commitment to finding a peaceful negotiated solution to all the outstanding issues, as well as the establishment of a tripartite committee. The third point, we appeal on all parties to refrain from any unilateral action that would hamper the continuation of negotiation and exacerbate further the already fragile situation. We must be continuously aware that in exercising rights, we are also bound by responsibilities, including to our neighbors. Let us show that we are all responsible parties. What is at stake is the lives and livelihood of millions of people from the upstream to the downstream of the River Nile. Mr. President, I think Sir William Golding, British author and poet, is quite correct in saying that he who rides the Sea of the Nile must have sails woven of patience. I hope that all parties can weave this sail of patience to allow negotiation to conclude at the earliest time and to refrain from action that will not serve the purpose of all those whose lives depend on the Nile. I should like to end by quoting an old Kanuri proverb of West Africa as follows. I quote, "At the bottom of patience, one finds heaven," unquote. Let us all find the heaven that we seek, namely peace, stability, and prosperity for our people. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Indonésie pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante de la Belgique.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. First of all, I want to thank Mrs. Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing, and I want to welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, as well as distinguished representatives from Ethiopia and Sudan. And I want to thank them in advance for sharing with us their views today later on. I can be very brief, as I'm in complete agreement with what has been said by my colleague from Estonia. So I can just repeat that we welcome the leadership of the African Union in this matter and that we hope for a mutually agreeable settlement as dialogue is key. Thank you so much, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie la représentante de la Belgique pour son intervention et je vais à présent prononcer une déclaration en ma qualité de représentant de la France.
You are the only participant.
Je remercie Madame Di Carlo pour sa présentation et je salue la présence parmi nous de Monsieur Choukri et des ambassadeurs du Soudan et d'Éthiopie. Le différend qui entoure le barrage de la Renaissance risque, s'il n'est pas résolu d'une manière satisfaisante pour toutes les parties, de générer plus de tensions dans la région. Comme l'ont indiqué mes collègues européens, tout doit être mis en œuvre pour éviter l'escalade. J'en appelle donc à la responsabilité des dirigeants des 3 pays concernés. Je tiens à saluer les efforts du gouvernement soudanais pour relancer le processus de négociation, ainsi que l'Afrique du Sud, les États-Unis et l'Union européenne pour leur implication dans ces pourparlers. L'Union africaine a un rôle majeur à jouer pour faciliter et accompagner ces négociations. Les discussions conduites la semaine dernière sous l'égide du président Ramaphosa marquent un pas dans la bonne direction et doivent se poursuivre dans un esprit constructif pour parvenir à un accord. Nous encourageons la poursuite des négociations dans ce cadre et appelons à leur conclusion rapide, conformément à l'état des...
እሺ ለተወሰነ ሰዓት ነው አንድ የሚባል የእንግሊዞች አባባል አለ from the horse's mouth ይሉታል ዜና መስማት ከተፈለገ ከምንጩ ነው እና ይሄንን እያደረገላችሁ ነው ማንንም አላደረገላችሁም ላይቭ እንደዚህ የትኛውንም ሚዲያ አታገኙትም ምናልባት እኔ ለራሴ ክሬዲት መስጠት አልፈልግም ግን እንዴት ሆኜ ገብቼ እንዳገኘሁት እኔ ነኝ የማውቀው ኢንጆይ አድርጉት ነገ ምንም ቢወራ ምንም ቢባል የዚህ ቤት ተከታታዮች የዚህ የቶሎሳ ኢብሳ ፎሎወርስ እናንተ በቂ መረጃ አላችሁ እሺ ነገ ሚዲያው ምንም ቢያወራ ምንም አይደንቃችሁም ትርጉሙን በተመለከተ ነገ በስፋት እንገባበታለን ትንታኔ እንሰጥበታለን እሺ
እስካሁን ድረስ ምን እያሉ ነው እስካሁን ድረስ ያሉት ነገር እሺ
እስካሁን ድረስ ሁሉም አንድ ማጠቃለያ ልናገር የራሻው የተናገረው ሁሉንም ይወክላል
ኦኬ
አፍሪካን ሶሉሽን to African problem to African solution የሚል በጣም አጭር የሆነች ንግግር ነች የተናገረው ይሄ ነው የአፍሪካኖች ችግር የሚፈታው በአፍሪካኖች ብቻ ነው ብሎ የተናገረውን የራሻውን የጸጥታው ምክር ቤት አባልን ሁሉም ደግፈውታል ሁሉም አንስተውታል የአሜሪካውና የእንግሊዙ የታወቀ ነው ነገ ትንታኔ ውስጥ እንገባበታለን አይዟችሁ ግን ሁሉም የኢትዮጵያን የአፍሪካን ችግር አፍሪካኖች ይፍቱት በሚለው ተስማምተዋል ውጤቱም ጥሩ ነው የሚሆነው hopefully ግብጽ ከነበረችበት ሁኔታ ወደ ኋላ አሁን ይሄ ሁሉ የሆነው በግብጽ ግፊት ነው ድጋፍ አጣለች ግብጽ እናጠቃልለው ድጋፍ አጣለች ግብጽ የጠበቀችውን አይደለም ያገኘች ያለችው ምክንያቱም ህጉ አይፈቅድም ትላንት ተናግረናል የራሱ የጸጥታው ምክር ቤት እንደማይፈቅድ ትላንትና አንዳንድ ነገሮችን አልተሰጠ
ፈረንሳይኛ ስለሆነ ነው የሚናገረው ቀጣ በእንግሊዝኛ ሲሆን
ስለሆነ ነው የገባው ፈረንሳይኛ I can't speak I don't understand France sorry
ፈረንሳይኛ ስለሆነ ነው ከፈረንሳይኛው ሲያልቅ እንግሊዝኛው እናስተላልፍላችኋለን ላይ በቀጥታ እስከዛ ድረስ ተናገር ብዬ
ነው በቃ ይሄው ነው ዝርዝሩን ነገር እንመጣበታለን
ኦኬ
ግን ልንላችሁ የፈለግነው ምንድነው ይሄንን ከማንም የማታገኙትን አያችሁት
ኦኬ ሽሜ
ላይ ባያችሁት ምናልባትም ከጠቅላይ ሚኒስትሩ ጋር ቁጭ ብላችሁ እያያችሁ ነው አሁን
ከጠቅላይ ሚኒስትሩ ጋር ቁጭ ብላችሁ እያያችሁ ነው ኦኬ ቴንክ ዩ ሶ ማች እሺ ስለፈልገ ስላገኘን
ጋዜጠኞች ምንም አትጠብቁ
ኦኬ ፈልገ ስላገኘልን በጣም እናመሰግናለን ይሄን ዌብሳይት በጣም ብዙ ነገር አድርገህ ነው ከቀደኛ ምርስ ጉሩጉሩ የነበርከው ስላገኘልን በጣም እናመሰግናለን ቴንክ ዩ ሶ ማች
ያጠፋሁት ጊዜ ይሄንን ለማግኘት ምንም ማለት አይደለም ግን I've done it anyway
ኦኬ ቴንክ ዩ ሶ ማች ኦኬ ቻው ጓዶች ሽሜ ነው ያገኘላችሁ በነገራችን ላይ እኔ አይደለሁም ጎልጎሎ ያገኘው እሱ ነው ከዛ በኋላ ያለውን ሊንክ አምጥቶ ሰጠኝ ሊንኩን በሊንኩ መሰረት ቁጭ አድርጌ በቴሌቪዥን ላይ አስቀመጥኩት ይሄን ነው አመስግኑት። አንዳንዴ በጣም ወደ ከሁለት ሰዓት በላይ ነው የፈጀበት እንትን ሲል ያው ፈረንሳይኛ ስለሆነ ነው። ፈረንሳይኛ የሚሰማ ሰው አለ? ልክፈተው። ያው ፈረንሳይኛ ነው።
From any action that could undermine this
objective and the
continuation of the discussions. Je reprends mes fonctions de président du Conseil de sécurité et je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence Monsieur Sameh Choukri, ministre égyptien des Affaires étrangères. Minister, you have the floor. We don't hear you, Monsieur le Ministre. We don't hear you. Yeah. Do you hear me now? Very good. Oh, thank you once again. Your Excellency, the Permanent Representative of France and the President of the United Nations Security Council for the month of June, distinguished representatives of the member states of the United Nations Security Council, colleagues and dear brothers, representatives of Sudan and Ethiopia. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the President of the Security Council for his able leadership of the Security Council during a time of unprecedented challenges and daunting crisis. I would also like to thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her remarks. Indeed, these are truly tumultuous times. Humanity is being tested by an invisible foe that has robbed us of countless souls, wrought untold in economic suffering, and brought life to a standstill across the world. But as we face the scourge of this global pandemic, and as our frailty is laid bare before us, we are reminded of our common humanity. We are reminded that beyond the multitude of cultures and creeds, and the diversity of nations and peoples, we are ultimately a single human family, the welfare of which demands that we look beyond narrow self-interest and promote the bonds of solidarity within our global community. Mr. President, the matter on which I am addressing you today is of the greatest consequence to the Egyptian people and requires, like our efforts to combat this global pandemic, a commitment to uphold the spirit of cooperation and to recognize that no nation is an island unto itself, entire of itself, but part of a community bound by common destiny. A threat of potentially existential proportions has emerged that could encroach on the single source of livelihood of over 100 million Egyptians. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a colossal project that Ethiopia has constructed across the Blue Nile, could endanger the security and very survival of an entire nation by imperiling its wellsprings of sustenance. While we recognize the importance of this project to the developmental objectives of the Ethiopian people, a goal that we certainly share and support, it is essential to realize that this megadam, which is Africa's largest hydropower facility, potentially threatens the welfare, the well-being, and the existence of millions of Egyptians and Sudanese citizens. Therefore, the unilateral filling and operation of this dam, without an agreement that includes the necessary precautions to protect the downstream communities and to prevent the infliction of significant harm on their riparian rights, would heighten tensions and could provoke crises and conflicts that further destabilize an already troubled region. Accordingly, it is important that the Security Council consider this matter. As the body entrusted by the international community with the unique responsibility to maintain international peace and security, the Council is expected to exercise watchful vigilance to avert the escalation of tensions, to prevent the outbreak of conflict, and to contain crises that threaten to prejudice the peace in a fragile region. We trust that in discharging these duties and fulfilling its responsibilities, the Security Council will act with diligence and vigor to resist instances of unilateralism that could undercut the foundational tenets of our international system that are enshrined in this organization's hallowed charter. As a responsible stakeholder, Egypt elected to bring this matter to the attention of the Security Council to forestall further escalation and to ensure that unilateral actions do not undermine efforts to reach an agreement on the GERD or prejudice the riparian rights and interests of downstream states, or more alarmingly, to endanger the lives of almost 150 million Egyptians and Sudanese citizens, thereby generating greater tension in an unstable region. We are therefore encouraged that the Security Council is holding today's session. This reflects the commitment of its members to ensure that this essential organ of the United Nations fulfills its responsibilities as enshrined in the Charter. Mr. President, we in Egypt populate the most arid of the Nile Basin riparian states and one of the most water-impoverished nations on earth. This harsh reality compels us to inhabit no more than 7% of our territory, along a slender strip of green and a fertile delta teeming with millions of souls, those whose annual share of water is no more than 560 cubic meters, which places Egypt well below the international threshold of water scarcity. On the other hand, our brethren in Ethiopia have been endowed by divine providence with plentiful water resources, which include an average annual rainfall of almost 936 billion cubic meters of water, of which a mere 5% flow into the Blue Nile, and 11 other river basins, some of which are shared with neighboring states, and all of which provide endless opportunities for regional economic cooperation and integration. This means that if GERD is filled and operated unilaterally, in the absence of a mutually beneficial agreement that protects the lives and livelihoods of downstream communities, it can place further stress on our already severely strained hydrological reality and endanger millions of people in both Egypt and Sudan. Concurrently, however, we are unwaveringly committed to support our fellow African nations, especially in the Nile Basin, and including Ethiopia, in their efforts to realize greater prosperity. This is evident in the fact that Egypt has cooperated with every Nile Basin state in constructing dams, in rain harvesting projects, in digging water wells, and the removal of water weeds that constrict the flow of the river. This reflects our unshakable belief in our common destiny as Africans and confirms our conviction that the Nile River is not the exclusive property of Egypt, nor of any riparian state, but the common heritage and the sacred trust of all our peoples. Therefore, for almost a decade, Egypt has initiated and engaged in painstaking negotiations on the GERD. Our objective throughout these arduous talks was to reach a fair and just agreement that ensures that Ethiopia achieve its legitimate developmental objectives while minimizing the harmful effects of this dam on downstream communities. We endeavored tirelessly to reach an agreement that harnesses the developmental potential of this dam for Ethiopia while limiting its many perils for Egypt and Sudan. Mr. President, because the two letters addressed by the government of Egypt to the Security Council on May the 1st and June the 19th, 2020, have detailed the successive stages of the negotiations on the GERD, I will only recount the main milestones of these arduous talks, throughout which we conducted ourselves with good faith and demonstrated a genuine political will to reach a fair and balanced agreement that preserves the rights and equities of all three riparian states that share the Blue Nile. Since Ethiopia unilaterally commenced the construction of this dam, our negotiations have included numerous trilateral and bilateral summits, meetings between the leaders of our three countries. Moreover, in a testament to our enduring commitment and abiding faith in the values of our African continent, we attended and convened several regional bilateral and multilateral summits and meetings with our other African brethren in a bid to facilitate the reaching of an agreement that assures Ethiopia that it will generate hydropower efficiently and sustainably while limiting and minimizing the adverse effects and preventing the significant harm of this dam on downstream states. We also held countless trilateral meetings between the ministers of water affairs and their technical teams, and many meetings of the ministers of foreign affairs to provide political support to these talks. And we established an independent committee of hydrologists to provide impartial scientific analysis of the scenarios of the filling and operation of the GERD. Unfortunately, however, all of these efforts have come to naught. To overcome the hurdles facing our negotiations and invigorate these talks, our three countries concluded on March the 23rd, 2015, the agreement on declaration of principles on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. This treaty, the content and terms of which are unambiguous and unequivocal, was intended to provide greater political impetus and guidance to our discussions. It reconfirmed the legal obligations incumbent upon Ethiopia to conduct studies on the transboundary hydrological and socioeconomic effects of the GERD and to undertake an assessment of its environmental impact. It also reaffirmed Ethiopia's political commitment and its legal obligation not to fill the dam without an agreement with its two downstream riparians on the rules governing both the filling and operation, which would guarantee Ethiopia the hydropower benefits of this project while minimizing its many harms on downstream states. Regrettably, however, despite the fact that we contracted an international consultancy firm to conduct the studies on the effects and impacts of the dam, the process of undertaking these studies was obstructed, and as a result, they were never completed. Nor do we have unassailable guarantees regarding the safety and structural soundness of the GERD. This means that in the absence of sufficient scientific data, communities downstream of this great structure appear condemned to live in the dark shadow of a great unknown. If, God forbid, the GERD experiences structural failures or faults, it would place the Sudanese people under unimaginable peril and would expose Egypt to unthinkable hazards. Indeed, our concerns in this regard are not unwarranted. In 2010, the headrace tunnel of the Gibi 2 Dam, constructed across the Omo River, collapsed within days of the completion of its construction. It is also deeply disheartening that throughout the winding path of these negotiations on the GERD, Egypt has been subjected to an unjustifiable campaign of unfounded claims that we sought to bind other parties to agreements from the dark era of colonialism. The reality, however, is that every treaty relating to the Nile that was concluded by Ethiopia was signed by its government, free of any compulsion or coercion, and as an independent and sovereign state. These include a treaty freely signed by the Emperor of Abyssinia in 1902 that prohibited the construction of any waterworks across the Blue Nile that affect the natural flow of the river, and a general framework for cooperation, also freely signed by Ethiopia's late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi and Egypt's president in 1993, in addition to the 2015 agreement on declaration of principles. Needless to say, all of these treaties remain binding and in force. Mr. President, as construction of the GERD neared completion, and as every other path towards an agreement proved unsuccessful, Egypt called upon our partners in the United States of America and the World Bank to join our talks in an attempt to bridge the gap between our three countries. This led, after intensive negotiations, in which the two countries fully participated, and for the first time after almost a decade of talks, to an agreement that was prepared under the auspices of the United States and with the technical input from the World Bank.
This agreement with Egypt accepted and initialed on February the 28th, 2020, but which Ethiopia rejected at the 11th hour, provided a fair and balanced win-win solution that promotes the interests of our three countries and preserves their riparian rights and equities. This agreement, which is annexed to our letter addressed to the Security Council dated June 19th, 2020, is now available to the international community as a testament to Egypt's goodwill and as evidence beyond any doubt that an equitable and fair agreement was available for the parties to sign. Furthermore, because Egypt is dedicated to explore every possible avenue to reach an agreement on the GERD, it partook in the latest round of negotiations that were held upon the initiative of the Republic of Sudan. However, these talks were also unsuccessful. It is Egypt's belief that an agreement on the GERD must be a legally binding instrument under international law that must also include clear definitions that establish the threshold of significant harm that must be prevented, in addition to a binding dispute resolution mechanism to ensure the effective implementation of any agreement. On the other hand, it was argued that mere guidelines of uncertain and ambiguous legal value that could be unilaterally adjusted should suffice. It was also suggested that any such document would not include a firm obligation to prevent the infliction of significant harm on downstream riparians. Moreover, in keeping with our principled position that the GERD must be filled and operated in accordance with a mutually beneficial agreement that promotes the common interests of our three countries, Egypt accepted the invitation of His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa to hold an extraordinary African Union Bureau of the Assembly of the Heads of State and Government meeting on June 26, 2020 to deliberate on this matter. The object and purpose of this meeting was to ensure that an agreement on the GERD is reached expeditiously. As such, it was agreed that intergovernmental technical negotiations will be held with a view to achieving this goal within 2 weeks. Moreover, during this meeting, Ethiopia committed not to take any unilateral measures by commencing the filling of the GERD before an agreement is reached. This commitment can only be interpreted as an unequivocal undertaking to ensure that the filling of the GERD is executed in accordance with rules agreed upon between the three riparian states. Any other understanding or interpretation of this commitment would reflect the lack of political will to reach an agreement on the GERD and reveal an underlying intention to impose an unacceptable fait accompli on downstream states and enforce the unilateral will of an upstream state on its co-riparians and turn any talks into an exercise in futility. Mr. President, it is incumbent on the Security Council to take note of and welcome these outcomes of the meeting of the African Union Bureau, and to call upon the three countries to comply with their commitments and pledges. Arrangements and organizations
We don't care about your
have an
propaganda.
important role to play as responsible members of the global community.
So many decades.
It is unquestionable that in matters relating to international peace and security, the Security Council remains the preeminent body in the international system. It was on the basis of this reality, in light of the Council's primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, that Egypt brought this matter to the Security Council. While we remain involved in a process of negotiations under our African mechanisms, it is imperative that this august body remains actively engaged in this matter. Unilaterally without an agreement with Egypt and Sudan would jeopardize the interests of downstream communities whose existence and survival depend on the Nile River. Furthermore, the unilateral operation of this megadam would have disastrous socio-economic effects that will diminish every dimension of the human security of Egyptians, including food security, water security, environmental security, and human health. It will also expose millions to greater economic vulnerability, leading to increasing rates of crime and illegal immigration. It would reduce water quality, disrupt the riparian ecosystem, damage biodiversity, and aggravate the dangers of climate change. This eventuality represents a serious threat to international peace and security.
How many
It
minutes
would
is
also have
taking?
serious, if not seismic, political ramifications. Downstream states would find themselves in an intolerable situation and create an atmosphere of animosity between our countries and sow the seeds of discord between our peoples. It is therefore necessary for the Security Council and the international community to exert every effort and support every initiative that is intended to lift this looming threat and remove this ominous peril on the horizon. While our position remains that the only viable solution to the question of the GERD is to reach a fair and balanced agreement, Egypt will uphold and protect the vital interests of its people. Survival is not a question of choice, but an imperative of nature. Accordingly, we call upon the Security Council to encourage the parties to negotiate in good faith, to reach an agreement on the GERD, and to refrain from any unilateral measures until such an agreement is reached. Until our efforts are successful and an agreement is concluded, the Security Council should, as it discharges its duties, remain actively seized of the matter. In this context, Egypt has presented a draft resolution for deliberation by the Security Council that is consistent with the outcomes of the African Union Bureau meeting. It encourages the three states to reach an agreement within 2 weeks and not to take any unilateral measures in relation to the GERD, and emphasizes the important role of the UN Secretary General in this regard. This draft resolution is not intended to preempt or forestall any negotiations, but to express at the highest level the keen interest of the international community in reaching an agreement on the GERD and its appreciation of the dangers of acts of unilateralism in this matter. While we continue to extend an unfailing hand of friendship to our brethren, we expect our kinsmen with whom we share the Nile River to reciprocate our goodwill and act with responsibility. Much as we wholeheartedly support Ethiopia's right to development, including through the use of our shared water resources, we believe that justice dictates that Ethiopia respects Egypt's right to life. Indeed, as His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi declared in his statement before a joint session of the Ethiopian Parliament, and I quote, "I urge us to lay the foundations for a better future for our children and grandchildren, a future where all classrooms in Ethiopia could have electricity, and where children in Egypt could drink water from the Nile as their parents and grandparents did, a future where the economies of both our countries would expand to absorb their entire labor force, with the purpose of guaranteeing a decent life to our peoples, so as to restore their standing among the family of nations, given their glorious history and immense potential." I end quote. In conclusion, Mr. President, I must reiterate that we stand ready to exert every effort to reach an agreement on the GERD. I call on my friends and colleagues in Ethiopia and Sudan to summon the spirit of brotherhood and kinship between our countries and our peoples. Let us embrace the undeniable truth of our commonality and camaraderie. Let us grasp the opportunity that is before us to shape our fate, rewrite history, and chart a new course of peace and prosperity for our peoples. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci, Son Excellence, Monsieur Sameh Choukri, pour sa déclaration. Et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Soudan.
Soudan, Sina. እስቲ አንተ ደግሞ ምን ትል ይሆን? እናንተ መቼም አትያዙ።
We don't hear you, Ambassador. There is no sound.
You hear me now? Yes, thank you very much. Mr. President, Thank you very much. And please allow me at the outset to sincerely extend my appreciation to you, Mr. President, for skillfully navigating the work of the Security Council during the pandemic of COVID-19 and the difficulties we are living in nowadays. Also, Mr. President, I want to thank Rosemary DiCarlo for the excellent report. I also want to thank the entire membership of the Security Council for their statements, and I also want to thank His Excellency Sameh Shukri for his statements, and I also welcome my friend and colleague Ambassador Tai of Ethiopia. Sir President, as the two letters from the Republic of the Sudan sent by my Minister for Foreign Affairs to the Security Council, those letters explain that Sudan is a riparian country to the Blue Nile. It is the immediate downstream country to the GERD. Sudan stands to be positively and negatively impacted by it. Thus, it is of great importance that the Council gets acquainted with the position of the Sudan regarding the GERD, regarding the respective negotiations, and pertaining to the way forward. Mr. President, Sudan recognizes that Egypt has the right to develop its water resources for the benefit of its people without causing significant harm to the other riparian countries. However, Ethiopia must ensure that any potential negative impact of the project is properly addressed and adequately mitigated in close consultation and cooperation with the downstream countries. As it was reflected earlier in our two letters, the Sudanese two letters, the GERD has positive as well as negative impacts on the Sudan. As for the negative impacts to be realized, and as for the positive impacts to be realized and the negative impacts to be mitigated, there must be comprehensive agreement to guide the filling and operation of the dam. Mr. President, since 2011, Sudan has continuously participated in good faith in the negotiations on the GERD, fully abiding and adhering to the United Nations Convention on the law of non-navigational uses of international water courses, UN Convention, which reflects and codifies the basic principles of customary international water law, including the four principles, mainly, number one, equitable and reasonable utilization. Number two, the obligation not to cause significant harm. Number three, notification and exchange of data and information. And finally, number four, peaceful settlement of disputes. Mr. President, cognizant of the necessity and importance of the trilateral agreement, my country continued advocating for a mutual, comprehensive, and inclusive agreement of all the three riparian countries. Against this backdrop, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, Sudan refrained from signing the outcome of negotiations in Washington in the absence of Ethiopia. Sudan also refused to endorse the League of Arab States decision on the GERD. And recently, Sudan rejected a proposal by Ethiopia for a partial agreement on the first stage filling the GERD. So, President, Sudan strongly believes that reaching an agreement on the guidelines and principles before the commencement of the filling of the GERD is extremely necessary for the three countries to avoid putting millions of lives and communities at great risk. Any decision on the timing and the filling of the GERD has to be agreed upon. Mr. President, the negotiations among the three countries, namely Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, commenced in 2011. In March 2015, the three countries were able to successfully conclude an agreement on the Declaration of Principles, which was signed by the heads of state and government of the three countries in Khartoum. Throughout the period from November 2019 to February 2020, and upon the request by Egypt to include the United States and the World Bank as observers, the ministers of foreign affairs and ministers of water resources in the three countries were engaged in 6 rounds of negotiations in Washington. During those rounds, 5 technical meetings were consequently held in Addis Ababa, Khartoum, and Cairo. During the Washington process, namely in November and February 12th and 13th, 2020, the three countries had achieved a major breakthrough when they reached an agreement on the most of the issues under negotiations. And they agreed to discuss and finalize the remaining issues during the next meeting to be held at the end of February 2020 in Washington. However, Ethiopia opted not to attend the meeting. Sudan refused to take part in any bilateral process. Therefore, the draft reached was not signed by the three countries. Mr. President, in March 2020, the Prime Minister of the Republic of the Sudan, His Excellency Dr. Abdullah Hamdok, led an initiative to convince the parties to resume the negotiations with the view to reaching a fair, comprehensive, and final agreement. His efforts culminated in restarting bilateral technical discussion, which were followed by trilateral negotiations at the level of ministers of water resources. In the context of the Sudanese initiative, the three parties have concluded a total of 7 trilateral video conference meetings. During that period, Sudan submitted 3 versions of a compromise draft agreement for the first filling and the annual operation of the GERD. The first version was based on the consensus reached during the Washington process, while the second and the third versions were based on the feedback and suggestions received from Egypt and from Ethiopia during those last negotiations. It is a fact, Mr. President, that the three countries made significant progress. During the last round of negotiations on the technical issues, mainly the first filling, annual operation, mitigation measures, the dam safety, environmental and social issues, cooperation, and data exchange. However, on the legal issues, a widening gap emerged in the issue of binding nature of the legal agreement, including amendments and termination, dispute resolution mechanism, and the reference to 1959 water treaty between Egypt and Sudan, as well as the demand by Ethiopia to enter into water sharing agreement within 10 years in accordance with the Nile Basin Comprehensive Framework Agreement. Since the divergent views were of legal and political nature, and according to Article 10 of the Declaration of Principles, the Sudanese side suggested invoking Article 10 thereof, that's of the Declaration of Principles, to refer the issue to the heads of state and government. So till now, we believe the Khartoum process is not yet exhausted, and Khartoum can play a further role in solving this problem within the African initiative. Mr. President, we are confident that the draft agreement proposed by Sudan during the last round, namely on June 14th, constitutes a comprehensive, fair, and balanced draft, which the three countries can adopt as the basis for their negotiations. The details of this draft are incorporated in the annexes of the letter of Her Excellency, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Sudan, sent to the Security Council, dated 24th June 2020. It is our conviction that with political will and commitment, the three countries can conclude this historic agreement. Mr. President, we highly regard the involvement of the African Union through its chairperson, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, and in the extraordinary summit, which took place virtually on 26 June 2020. The three concerned countries participated and addressed the summit along with the members of the African Bureau and the chairperson of the African Union. The outcome of that mini summit was circulated by the Commission of the African Union, which welcomed the commitment by the three parties to the African Union-led process and called for the following: requesting the Security Council to take note of the fact that the African Union is seized of the matter, lending a renewed impetus to the tripartite negotiations, urging the parties to find mutually acceptable and amicable solutions to the outcome issues, calling the parties to refrain from making any statement or any action that may jeopardize and complicate the African Union process, and finally, establishment of committees to reach amicable solutions within 1 week. Mr. President, we strongly believe that the African-led process can push forward the three parties' efforts to reach comprehensive, fair, and balanced agreement. In light of the significant processes scored earlier, putting in mind the draft agreement made by Sudan during the last rounds of negotiations, and within the 7-point consensus reached by the extraordinary summit of the African Union. Mr. President, in conclusion, and with reference to the content of the two letters by the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sudan, which were presented to the Security Council on 2nd and 24th June, respectively, I reiterate the request of the government of the Sudan. Number one, to call on the leaders of the three countries to demonstrate their political will and commitment by resolving the few remaining issues and conclude the agreement. Number two, call upon the parties to adopt the comprehensive draft Sudan has submitted as the basis of finalizing the agreement. And number three, discourage all parties from any action that may jeopardize the efforts by the African Union. I thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Soudan pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Éthiopie.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, my warm greetings to all Security Council members. My greetings also go to Minister Shukri and my good friend, Ambassador Omar Sadiq of Sudan. Mr. President, as a founding member of the United Nations, Ethiopia's commitment to the principles and purpose of the United Nations Charter has been solid and consistent. It has always been a staunch supporter of the principles of collective security and multilateralism. Ethiopia's track record in this regard speaks for itself. It has always adhered to and actively supported and promoted these principles at regional and international levels. In its entire history, Ethiopia has never caused a threat to any country. It has instead been contributing to the cause of peace through its active participation in peacekeeping and peace building since the early days of the United Nations up until now. This said, let me be clear that Ethiopia doesn't believe the issue being discussed today has a legitimate place in the Security Council. It is bound to set a bad precedent and open a Pandora box. This council should not be a forum for exerting diplomatic pressure. As we have informed the council, the tripartite negotiation between Ethiopia, Egypt, and the Sudan has not yet been concluded. The three countries have in fact reached consensus on most of the prominent technical issues in the last rounds of the negotiation. That's why Ethiopia is of the few that progress at hand, and a mutually beneficial agreement is within reach. Even if the three countries fail to resolve their differences on the outstanding issues, the Declaration of Principles, DOP, signed in 2015 by their leaders, provides for dispute settlement mechanisms which are yet to be exhausted. Furthermore, the African Union has the necessary goodwill and expertise to help the three countries in bridging their differences and reaching a mutually acceptable solution. It is indeed lamentable, to say the least, that the principles of complementarity and subsidiarity between the UN and regional organizations, much talked about in this council, was ignored when the issue related to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam was unjustifiably brought to its attention. It also contravenes Article 33 of the United Nations Charter, which stipulates that parties to any dispute, among others, shall first resort to regional agencies or arrangements. Members of the Council are aware that 3 days ago, as mentioned earlier, the Bureau of the Assembly of the African Union held an extraordinary meeting under the chairmanship of His Excellency President Ramaphosa. As stated in the communique issued on 27 June 2020, the three countries agreed to resume negotiation and resolve the remaining issues through tripartite consultation under an AU-led process in the spirit of Pan-African solidarity and within the framework of African solution to African problems. Therefore, the African Union is now seized of the matter, and it's only appropriate that this council allows the AU-led process to take its course. Mr. President, needless to say, the Nile is as important to Ethiopia as it is to Egypt and the Sudan as a source of livelihood and economic development. The GERD is conceived as the centerpiece of our national development aspiration. Ethiopia generates 86% of the total average annual flow of the Nile waters, but it has never benefited from the river at all. The 1959 agreement between Egypt and the Sudan has apportioned the entire waters of the Nile between the two of them, with Egypt securing the lion's share, leaving nothing for Ethiopia. That was the unilateralist decision to have ever been taken concerning transboundary rivers. In 1997, Egypt again took another unilateral decision and built the Toshka and the Peace Canals, taking the Nile water away from its natural course. Ethiopia's repeated complaints over these projects in the mid-1950s fell on deaf ears. The first complaint was made by the government of Emperor Haile Selassie regarding the 1959 agreement. Egypt ignored Ethiopia's subsequent objections. Despite these historical facts, Egypt continues to accuse Ethiopia of taking unilateralist action with respect to the building of the GERD, as you heard earlier. Mr. President, Ethiopia is not asking too much. It is seeking to correct past injustice and share this precious resource in an equitable and reasonable manner. Despite being endowed with abundant water resource in the Nile Basin for years, the people of Ethiopia have been deprived of their right to use the resource to extricate themselves from abject poverty. This is why, for Ethiopia, accessing and utilizing its water resource is not a matter of choice, but of existential necessity. The unfortunate reality is that today, in 2020, tens of millions of Ethiopians still use firewood as a primary source of fuel, with severe consequences to their health and the environment. All rural households, where 85% of Ethiopians live and nearly 2/3 of school children are forced to stay in darkness. This is a reality. By contrast, nearly 100% of Egyptian population, both in the cities and rural areas, have access to electricity. Therefore, Ethiopia believes that it has a national and moral imperative to do everything in its power to improve the lives of its people. GERD is an answer to Ethiopian mothers' cries for help so that they don't have to trek hours to collect firewood. The unfortunate reality is that pregnant mothers are still being carried on stretchers over a long distance due to lack of electricity to access life-saving emergency medical care. The image of young girls with back-breaking loads of firewood on their shoulders is also a daily reality. Once completed, the dam will generate 15,700 gigawatt hours annually, bringing electricity and an opportunity for a dignified life to more than 65 million people who currently live in complete darkness. That is why we are emphasizing again and again that GERD is a development project and it cannot in any way be a matter of security threat. If there is a security threat there to be discussed, it has to do with the fact that there are millions of Ethiopians living under the poverty line. The dam is meant to uplift these people, and in a way, it is averting a potential threat rather than posing any. Seeking social progress and better standards of life for our people, leaving no one behind, is indeed consistent with the spirit of the UN Charter and the Sustainable Development Goals that we all aspire to achieve in 2030. The GERD is also one of the mega projects envisaged under Ethiopia's effort to meet the African Union Agenda 2063. I should also underline here why the GERD is a people's project, which is being built by Ethiopians from all walks of life with an unprecedented deal and commitment. It is to be recalled that various obstacles were created to prevent Ethiopia from accessing international support. My government is just coordinating a public-owned, public-funded project. Therefore, it has a solemn responsibility to bring this project to a successful completion.
ሰበር መረጃ ልንገራችሁ እዚሁ ላይ በአጫሉ የተነሳ ማለት ነው። አጫሉ ተገደለ እየተባለ ነው። እስኪ ስሙትና ከዛ በኋላ ነግራችኋለሁ።
With both Egypt and Sudan on the GERD, by among others, establishing the International Panel of Experts and the Tripartite National Committee to implement its recommendation, and later the National Independent Scientific Research Group to formulate different scenarios and the first filling and annual operation of the GERD. All this initiative failed to deliver the desired result because of Egyptian intransigence and its insistence on historic rights and current use. The reason why Egypt has been consistently engaged in scuttling the tripartite negotiation has more to do with its own internal situation than anything else. On the other hand, Sudan knows full well the benefits of the dam. Be that as it may, Ethiopia has been guided by the internationally accepted principle of equitable and reasonable utilization and not causing significant harm in building the dam. Ethiopia cannot harm Egypt and the Sudan through the dam because if to harm is not to release water, then building it in the first place would have been meaningless and purposeless. We are all the people of the Nile. Therefore, Ethiopia cannot harm Egypt without harming itself. The DOP clearly encapsulates Ethiopia's firm commitment to the principles of transboundary water utilization. In fact, Ethiopia's good faith efforts have been unprecedented in the history of transboundary rivers. It doesn't deserve to be mistreated. It should be instead be commended for demonstrating exemplary cooperation. Mr. President, in October 2019, at the request of Egypt, the United States government invited the three countries to Washington, D.C. for consultation. Ethiopia responded positively in good faith and hoping that the presence of observers will help facilitate the negotiation. However, Egypt sought to impose unacceptable terms on Ethiopia by leveraging and influencing the process. Unfortunately, Egypt's actions muddied the water even further. Throughout the course of the negotiations, Ethiopia has shown a great deal of flexibility in the tripartite process to build the necessary trust and confidence. As a demonstration of its good faith gesture, Ethiopia agreed to fill the GERD reservoir from 4 to 7 years, although it could be filled in 3 years without causing significant harm to Egypt and the Sudan. Furthermore, Ethiopia agreed to postpone the second phase of the first filling if annual inflow at the GERD is below 31 billion cubic meters. Mr. President, the three countries have already agreed on the initial filling of the dam. Luckily, Mother Nature is an agreement too. This year is an opportune time to begin impounding water in the GERD reservoir. Currently, both the Blue Nile and the White Nile have above normal flow. Lake Victoria is at a record high level. The highest one dam is also at its full supply level of 182 meters above sea level, which is a record high for the past 40 years or 4 decades. During the first stage of the impoundment, which is a testing or a trial, Ethiopia will retain only about 1/10 of the average annual flow of the Blue Nile. By contrast, every year, twice the amount of the water retained during the initial filling of the GERD is lost to evaporation from the highest one dam. This is in addition to the wastage through water-intensive flood irrigation practice in Egypt. Water is increasingly becoming a scarce commodity. More than 60% of Ethiopia's surface area is dry land with no sustaining water resource. Egypt, on the other hand, is endowed with plenty of groundwater resources and has access to seawater, which could be desalinated for use. Mr. President, in any transboundary water course, drought management is the joint responsibility of all riparian countries. But Egypt wants Ethiopia to shoulder the burden of drought alone. Water use or dam operation rules are dependent on the availability of water. They depend on the Almighty God. Hence, operation rules must have special guidelines, creating two different hydrological conditions, including drought. Therefore, the three countries must agree on drought threshold and cooperative mechanism for sharing the responsibility for addressing and mitigating any consequences of drought and climate change. Furthermore, Ethiopia believes that any future disputes arising from the use of the Blue Nile water should be resolved in line with the principles agreed to in the DOP, which provides for a mechanism that allows the three countries to address their grievances through conciliation, mediation, by referring the matter for the consideration of our heads of state and government. Ultimately, Ethiopia believes any agreement must not in any way constrain its sovereign right to future use and upstream development on the Blue Nile. Mr. President, the involvement of the Security Council on this issue risks hardening position and making compromise even more difficult. Instead of pronouncing itself on this matter, the Council should defer to the African Union and encourage the three countries to return to the tripartite negotiations as the only means to finding an amicable solution to the remaining outstanding issues. We also hope the Council will be cautious not to amplify differences and undermine the AU-led process. The statement we just heard from our brother, Minister Shukri, glaringly shows that the AU-led mechanism is seen in a very precarious situation. The statement casts serious doubt. In this momentous year, marking the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, I wish to recall a moment in history when another Ethiopian leader, Emperor Haile Selassie, spoke before the League of Nations to make a moral case against the scourge of colonialism and the invasion of my country. He warned that it is us today, it will be you tomorrow. the League of Nations, unfortunately, did little to heed that call. It would be regrettable if Ethiopia's call today not to politicize and internationalize the issue of the girl is not heeded by this August Council. We can only hope that the Council will choose to be on the right side of history. For in a lot of ways, the matter being dealt with by the Council today is deeply rooted in a colonial legacy. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by emphasizing the fact that the Nile Basin country enjoy one of the oldest relationships in human history, as many of you mentioned earlier. The seeds of our common development were planted not today, thousands of years ago. Our time-tested links through the Nile should provide us with the truth, trust, and faith to do what is just for the betterment of all of our peoples. The GERD offers a unique opportunity for transboundary cooperation between our sisterly countries. It should never be an object of contention or mistrust. In this spirit, Ethiopia will pursue an amicable solution through a win-win negotiation. We also seek the understanding of our brothers and sisters from Egypt and Sudan. We are confident that we will reach a cooperative agreement in the coming weeks under the AU-led process. The Council should defer to the African Union, be cautious not to amplify differences, and encourage the three countries to return to the tripartite negotiation as the only avenue for finding a lasting resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Éthiopie pour sa déclaration. Je crois que M. Choukri souhaite dire à nouveau quelques mots.
To be in a position to have to comment on some of the statements of His Excellency, the distinguished representative of Ethiopia. But I would only like to mention that unlike our statement where we abided by the outcome of the Bureau meeting, we made no accusations as relates any of the positions of our co-riparians. Unfortunately, once again, the permanent representative of Ethiopia has lodged unsubstantiated accusations directed to Egypt, which would be considered as having contravened the outcome of the Bureau meeting in terms of how he might address this issue in a manner that does not further complicate it. I might be in a position to refute every single one of those accusations. But once again, in terms of the responsibility that we have shown for a decade of negotiations, I will refrain in respect of the Bureau meeting outcomes and will consider it sufficient to have made these brief comments. Thank you.
Je remercie son Excellence, M. Choukri, pour ses derniers commentaires. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs inscrits sur la liste et la séance est levée.
Mr. President, Ethiopia is asking for the floor again.
OK. Le représentant d'Éthiopie for very, very, very short comments. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much for giving me a second chance. I didn't in any way make a statement that contravenes the spirit of the AU head of state's encouragement that was made a couple of days. The spirit was one of a kind for all of us to come together and solve the outstanding issues. But the understanding that was clearly reverberated in the speech of Foreign Minister Shukri is that it casts a doubt on the commitment of the AU Bureau of Decision because a resolution is presented to the Security Council to consider it unilaterally. While on the other hand, following strictly, in our case, the decision in its totality and in its spirit of the Africa Bureau, we didn't vouch to file a complaint or look for a parallel track. That has by itself given us a message and in a way resonated that our brothers in Egypt are following parallel tracks while at the same time committing themselves to the Africa Bureau head decision. Thank you very much.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Éthiopie pour sa déclaration. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs inscrits sur la liste. La séance est levée.
What? ኧረ በእናትህ አውቆ ነው እንደ ቮት ሰዓት ለሚዘጉት ምን አይነት ሙስና ነው? ይሄማ አደገኛ ሙስና ነው። እናውቀዋለን እኮ ይኸው እዚህ ጋር ይሄማ አደገኛ ሙስና ነው። እግዚአብሔርን በጣም ይደብራል። እዚህ ጫፍ ላይ እኮ አለ። ይኸው አሁንም እኮ ጫፍ ላይ አለ ቮት እንትን ለማለት ይኸው ምልክቱ አለ እዚህ ጋር። ከዚህ በላይ ሙስና የለም። እኔ እውነቴን ነው የምላችሁ። ይሄ ነው በጣም የሚያስጠላ። ሁሌ አቤት ነጮች፣ አቤት ነጮች። በስማ እስቲ እዚህ ኧረ አንዳንዴ በጣም ይደብራል። ለማንኛውም ይሄ ነው እንግዲህ ከዚህ በላይ መጠን እሲት እኔ ከኔትወርክ አይደለም እኔ ከኔትወርክ አይደለም ከራሳቸው ነው። እዚህ ጋር አለ አለ ይሰራል። ኦኬ በቃ እንግዲህ መዝጋት ስላለብን ነው። እንግዲህ ነጮች ሙስ እቺ ኦኬ
Séance du Conseil de sécurité tenue par visioconférence est ouverte. Je me réfère au projet de résolution publié sous les codes S 2020-595 et S 2020-600. La procédure de vote sur les projets de résolution a été lancée le 26 juin 2020 et a pris fin le 29 juin 2020. Conformément à la procédure spéciale écrite sur laquelle les membres du Conseil se sont entendus et qui est définie dans la lettre du président du Conseil de sécurité en date du 27 mars 2020. J'attire l'attention des membres du Conseil sur le projet de résolution publié sous la cote S 2020-595 déposé par les États-Unis d'Amérique et la Fédération de Russie au titre de la question intitulée « La situation au Moyen-Orient ». Le résultat du vote est le suivant. Le projet de résolution a recueilli 15 voix pour. Le projet de résolution est adopté à l'unanimité en tant que résolution 25-30. J'attire l'attention des membres du Conseil sur le projet de résolution publié sous la cote S 2020-600, déposé par la France au titre de la question intitulée « La situation au Mali ». Le résultat du vote est le suivant. Le projet de résolution a recueilli 15 voix pour. Le projet de résolution est adopté à l'unanimité en tant que résolution 25-31. La séance est levée. Are you sure?
እነዚህ ሰዎች ኦኬ ቻናሉን ብቻ መጣለን። እንግዲህ ጓዶች ከነሱ ነው እንጂ ከኛ አይደለም። እንግዲህ ምን እንደሚወስኑ እንጠብቃቸው ወይስ እዚሁ ለናቋርጥ? እስቲ አንድ ድምጽ ስጡበት፣ አንድ ቁጥር እንጠብቅ ወይስ እዚሁ ለናቋርጥ? ያው ብዙ ነገር ሰምታችኋል። አጫሉ እንግዲህ አጫሉ ሞተዋል። በነገራችን ላይ አጫሉ ሁንዴሳ የተገደለው እንግዲህ ያው በአጠቃላይ ድምፃዊ አጫሉ ሁንዴሳ የተገደለው እንግዲህ ሞተዋል፣ የታወቀ ነው ይሄ። እስቲ በቃ ይሄ ላይቭ ልዝጋና በሌላ ላይቭ እንትን ልምጣላችሁ። አንድ ሰዓት ተኩል ስለሆነ በሌላ ላይቭ ላይ ከሁለት ደቂቃ በኋላ በአጫሉ ጉዳይ ላይ እንናገር። ከሁለት ደቂቃ በኋላ ማለት ነው። ይሄን ላይቭ እዚሁ ላይ ልዝጋው እንግዲህ እዚሁ ላይ ዘጋዋለሁ። ከሁለት ደቂቃ በኋላ ያው ከሁለት ደቂቃ በኋላ ሁላችሁም ከሁለት ደቂቃ በኋላ ያው ማምጣት ከፈለጋችሁ መታችሁ ማዳመጥ ትችላላችሁ። በአጫሉ ጉዳይ ላይ ይሄንን ነው የምላችሁ። ያው ይሄኛው ላይ በቀጥታ ያው እንደተዘጋ እያያችሁ ናላችሁ። ከሁለት ደቂቃ በኋላ ሰብስክራይብ ካላጋችሁ ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉ። እንግዲህ ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉና ከዛ በኋላ ከሁለት ደቂቃ ከሶስት ደቂቃ በኋላ ታገኛላችሁ ማለት ነው። ከሶስት ደቂቃ በኋላ ላይ በቀጥታ ላይ ለመግባት ሰብስክራይብ እና ደውላ ንኳት። ቴንክ ዩ ሶ ማች። ኢትዮጵያ ለዘላለም ትኑር። ቻው። ከሶስት ደቂቃ በኋላ እንገናኝ።